June 19, 1944. Dawn breaks over the Philippine Sea, casting long shadows across the vast Pacific waters. Lieutenant Commander Zenji Abe adjusts his flight goggles and peers through the morning haze from the cockpit of his Mitsubishi A6M0. Below him, the waves roll endlessly toward the horizon, but ahead lies something that will shatter everything he believes about this war. Abe leads a formation of 18 Zeros, part of Admiral Saburo Ozawa's mobile fleet, searching for the American task force that intelligence reports lurks somewhere in these waters. For 3 years, Japanese naval aviation has ruled these skies. From Pearl Harbor to the Java Sea, their pilots have proven themselves the finest in the world. Today should be no different. But as Abe climbs to 12,000 feet, something appears on the horizon that makes his blood run cold. Not one carrier, not 3, not even 6. Spread across the ocean like a steel city floating on water, he counts 12, then 15, then loses count entirely. Massive fleet carriers steam in perfect formation, their flight decks alive with aircraft. Hundreds of aircraft. More planes visible on those decks than exist in Japan's entire remaining air force. In that moment, staring at the impossible sight of Task Force 58, Lieutenant Commander Abe realizes that everything has changed. The war he thought he knew is over, and this new reality will consume them all. This is the story of how American industrial might transform naval warfare forever, and how Japanese pilots discovered that courage alone could not bridge the gap between what was and what had become. 3 years earlier, on December 7, 1941, the world witnessed what many considered impossible. 6 Japanese aircraft carriers had approached within striking distance of Pearl Harbor undetected, launching 353 aircraft in 2 devastating waves. The attack lasted less than 2 hours, but its effects rippled across the globe. 8 American battleships lay damaged or destroyed, along with numerous cruisers, destroyers, and aircraft. More than 2,400 Americans died, and the United States found itself thrust into a war it had desperately tried to avoid. The architects of this victory were not just the admirals who planned it, but the pilots who executed it with surgical precision. Men like Lieutenant Commander Mitsuo Fuchida, who led the first wave, and Lieutenant Commander Shigeharu Murata, who commanded the torpedo bombers. These aviators represented the pinnacle of naval aviation training, products of a system that had been perfecting carrier operations since the 1920s. Japanese naval aviation doctrine emphasized quality over quantity. Their pilots underwent rigorous training that lasted years, not months. They flew the Mitsubishi A6M0, an aircraft that could outmaneuver and outrange anything the Americans possessed in 1941. The Zero could fly 1,900 miles on internal fuel, allowing Japanese carriers to strike from distances their enemies never imagined possible. More importantly, Japanese pilots had combat experience. Many had flown missions over China since 1937, honing skills that their American counterparts lacked entirely. The months following Pearl Harbor only reinforced Japanese confidence. In January 1942, Japanese carriers supported the invasion of the Dutch East Indies. In February, they launched a devastating raid on Darwin, Australia. Admiral Chuichi Nagumo's first air fleet seemed unstoppable, their pilots achieving air superiority wherever they appeared. The British battleship Prince of Wales and battlecruiser Repulse fell to Japanese land-based bombers off Malaya. The Dutch East Indies collapsed. Singapore surrendered. Hong Kong fell. By April 1942, Japanese naval aviation controlled an area spanning from the Aleutians to the edge of Australia, from Wake Island to the coast of India. Their pilots had achieved something unprecedented in naval history. They had proven that aircraft carriers, not battleships, were the new queens of the sea. The Imperial Japanese Navy possessed 10 aircraft carriers, including the massive Shokaku and Zukaku, each capable of operating more than 70 aircraft. The Americans, by contrast, began 1942 with just 7 carriers in the entire Pacific Fleet, and 2 of those, Lexington and Yorktown, had been damaged at Pearl Harbor. The remaining carriers were older, smaller, and carried fewer aircraft. The USS Enterprise, perhaps the most famous American carrier of the early war, could operate only 90 aircraft compared to the 120 that the newest Japanese carriers embarked. Even more concerning for American strategists was the quality gap. Japanese pilots averaged 800 flight hours before joining carrier squadrons. American pilots often reached their ships with barely 300 hours of training. The Zero remained superior to every American fighter except the new F4F Wildcat, and even the Wildcat was inferior in most performance categories. Japanese torpedo bombers and dive bombers also outperformed their American equivalents in range, payload, and accuracy. This superiority manifested itself in the war's early battles. At the Battle of the Java Sea in February 1942, Japanese naval aviation helped destroy the entire Allied naval force in the Southwest Pacific. During the Indian Ocean raid in April 1942, Admiral Nagumo's carriers sank the British heavy cruisers Cornwall and Dorsetshire, along with the aircraft carrier Hermes. Each victory reinforced the perception that Japanese naval aviation was not just superior, but unstoppable. Yet even as Japanese pilots celebrated these triumphs, forces beyond their comprehension were already in motion on the other side of the Pacific. The attack on Pearl Harbor had awakened something in American society that would prove far more dangerous to Japan than any individual battle or campaign. The smoking ruins of Pearl Harbor had barely cooled when President Franklin Roosevelt signed legislation that would reshape the balance of naval power forever. The Two-Ocean Navy Act, passed in July 1940 but dramatically expanded after Pearl Harbor, authorized the construction of 18 fleet carriers, 9 light carriers, 58 escort carriers, and hundreds of supporting vessels. More importantly, it allocated resources on a scale that Japanese planners had never imagined possible. American shipyards that had built merchant vessels and pleasure craft suddenly transformed into naval arsenals. The Newport News Shipbuilding Company, which had constructed only one carrier before the war, began laying down Essex-class carriers at unprecedented rates. The New York Navy Yard, Brooklyn Navy Yard, and Philadelphia Navy Yard all converted to wartime production. By early 1942, American shipyards were launching new vessels faster than Japan could replace those lost in combat. The Essex-class carriers represented American industrial might at its peak. Each ship displaced 27,100 tons and could operate 90 aircraft, but these numbers only hinted at their true significance. Unlike Japanese carriers, which were individually crafted masterpieces taking years to complete, the Essex-class ships were mass-produced using assembly line techniques. Standardized components, prefabricated sections, and modular construction allowed American yards to complete these massive vessels in just 20 months from keel laying to commissioning. By 1943, the production rate had accelerated to almost unbelievable levels. The USS Intrepid was completed in just 16 months. The USS Cabot took 14 months from start to finish. American shipyards were not just building carriers, they were manufacturing them like automobiles, complete with standardized parts and interchangeable systems. Each Essex-class carrier required 32,000 tons of steel, 400 tons of aluminum, and 230 tons of copper, materials that American industry provided without strain. The aircraft industry underwent an even more dramatic transformation. In 1941, American factories produced 5,865 military aircraft. By 1943, that number had exploded to 85,098 aircraft annually. The Grumman Aircraft Engineering Corporation, which had struggled to produce 50 Wildcats per month in 1941, was delivering more than 600 fighters monthly by late 1943. Their new F6F Hellcat incorporated lessons learned from captured Zeros, combining superior armor and firepower with performance that finally matched Japanese fighters. Pilot training programs expanded with equal intensity. The Navy established new flight training bases across the American South and West, where favorable weather allowed year-round operations. By 1943, these facilities were graduating 2,000 new naval aviators monthly, compared to fewer than 100 per month in 1941. American pilot training emphasized standardized procedures and mass production of competent air crews, rather than the individualized excellence that characterized Japanese training. The scope of American mobilization extended far beyond ships and aircraft. Entire industries retooled for war production. The Ford Motor Company's Willow Run plant, originally designed to manufacture B-24 bombers, also produced aircraft engines and components for naval aviation. General Motors converted automobile production lines to manufacture aircraft engines and parts. Even small manufacturers contributed specialized components for carrier aircraft and shipboard systems. By mid-1943, the first Essex-class carriers were joining the Pacific Fleet. The USS Essex herself commissioned in December 1942, followed by the Yorktown, Intrepid, and Hornet in 1943. Each ship carried approximately 90 aircraft, but more importantly, each represented American industrial capacity operating at full throttle. The Japanese, meanwhile, struggled to replace losses from earlier battles and maintain their existing carrier force. The mathematics of production had shifted decisively. Japan's entire wartime aircraft production peaked at approximately 28,000 aircraft annually. The United States produced more than 96,000 aircraft in 1944 alone. Japanese shipyards completed perhaps 4 carriers during the entire war after Pearl Harbor. American yards launched more than 20 fleet and light carriers, plus over 120 escort carriers for convoy protection and amphibious support. Most ominously for Japan, American production was accelerating rather than plateauing. Intelligence reports reaching Tokyo described shipyards working around the clock, aircraft factories expanding monthly, and pilot training programs graduating thousands of new aviators. The industrial colossus that Japan had sought to neutralize at Pearl Harbor was now fully awakened and reaching its productive peak. As 1944 began, Task Force 58 represented the culmination of this industrial miracle, steaming toward the Philippine Sea with 15 fleet carriers and hundreds of aircraft ready to demonstrate that the age of Japanese naval aviation supremacy had ended forever. The human angle of this transformation reveals itself most powerfully in the personal accounts of pilots who witnessed the shift firsthand. Lieutenant Saburo Sakai, one of Japan's most accomplished aces with 64 confirmed victories, described his shock upon encountering American formations in late 1943. Where he had grown accustomed to facing 6 or 8 enemy aircraft, he now found himself outnumbered 20-1. Sakai later wrote that the psychological impact of seeing endless waves of American aircraft was almost as devastating as their improved performance. Young Japanese pilots, many with fewer than 200 flight hours, found themselves facing American aviators flying superior aircraft in overwhelming numbers. The contrast with American pilot experience. Tells the other side of this story. Ensign Alex Vraciu, who would become one of the Navy's leading aces, recalled his first combat mission in 1943 aboard the USS Intrepid. Instead of the desperate, undermanned missions that characterized early war American operations, Vraciu found himself part of massive formations with dedicated fighter escorts, backup squadrons, and coordinated support. American pilots increasingly fought with the confidence that comes from numerical superiority and superior equipment. They knew that even if shot down, rescue operations would likely find them quickly. From a tactical perspective, the numerical disparity forced both sides to completely reconsider their approaches to carrier warfare. Japanese doctrine had emphasized individual pilot skill and aircraft performance to achieve local air superiority through superior training and equipment. This approach worked brilliantly when facing equal or inferior numbers, but became suicidal when confronted with American mass formations. Japanese pilots found themselves forced to adopt defensive tactics, something their training had never emphasized. American tactical doctrine evolved to leverage their numerical advantages. The concept of the combat air patrol expanded from small defensive formations to massive fighter sweeps involving 60 or more aircraft. American strike missions grew from the modest 20-plane attacks of 1942 to coordinated strikes involving 200 or more aircraft from multiple carriers. The Thack Weave, developed by Lieutenant Commander John Thack to help Wildcats survive against Zeros, evolved into complex formation tactics designed to maximize the effectiveness of large fighter formations. The technological angle reveals how American industrial capacity translated into qualitative as well as quantitative advantages. The F6F Hellcat that began reaching carriers in 1943 represented more than just improved performance. It embodied American manufacturing philosophy. Unlike the handcrafted Zero, optimized for weight savings and range, The Hellcat was designed for mass production and pilot survivability. Its self-sealing fuel tanks, armor plating, and robust construction allowed pilots to survive combat damage that would have destroyed a Zero. American radar technology provided another crucial advantage that complemented their numerical superiority. Carrier-based radar allowed American task forces to detect incoming Japanese formations at ranges of 100 miles or more, providing time to launch defensive fighters and position strike aircraft optimally. The Japanese, lacking equivalent radar technology, often found themselves surprised by American formations appearing from directions they had not anticipated. This technological edge multiplied the effectiveness of American numerical advantages, allowing smaller numbers of defenders to defeat larger attacking formations through superior positioning and timing. The leadership angle illuminates how command decisions shaped the stark numerical disparities that emerged by 1944. Admiral Chester Nimitz's decision to concentrate American carrier strength into fast carrier task forces created unprecedented concentrations of naval aviation power. Task Force 58, under Vice Admiral Mark Mitcher, represented a revolutionary concept: 15 carriers operating as a single coordinated unit, capable of launching 1,000 aircraft simultaneously. No naval force in history had possessed such concentrated striking power. Japanese leadership, by contrast, struggled with resource allocation and strategic priorities. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto's death in April 1943 deprived the combined fleet of its most capable strategist, but even Yamamoto had never fully grasped the scale of American industrial mobilization. Japanese admirals continued planning operations based on assumptions of rough numerical parity that had ceased to exist by late 1943. Their decision to commit remaining carrier forces to the Philippine Sea battle reflected a fundamental misunderstanding of American capabilities. From the enemy angle, American intelligence services provided crucial insights into Japanese capabilities and limitations. Code-breaking operations revealed Japanese aircraft production figures, pilot training programs, and operational readiness reports. American commanders knew that Japan was struggling to replace experienced pilots and maintain aircraft production levels. This intelligence allowed American forces to time major operations for maximum effectiveness, striking when Japanese forces were at their weakest. The captured Japanese documents from Saipan in 1944 revealed the true extent of Japanese pilot shortages. Many squadrons operated at 50% strength, with replacement pilots averaging fewer than 100 flight hours. American intelligence officers realized that Japanese naval aviation was not just outnumbered, but also qualitatively degraded from its 1941-1942 peak. This knowledge influenced American tactical decisions, encouraging more aggressive operations that capitalized on Japanese weaknesses. The industrial angle demonstrates how American manufacturing capacity dwarfed anything Japan could achieve. The Kaiser Shipbuilding Company alone produced more escort carriers during the war than Japan-built carriers of all types. American aircraft factories operated multiple shifts, 7 days per week, with production lines that never stopped. The Grumman plant on Long Island produced F6F Hellcats at a rate that exceeded total Japanese fighter production for entire months. Japanese industry, despite heroic efforts, could not match this output. The Mitsubishi A6M0, which had dominated Pacific skies in 1941 to 1942, remained essentially unchanged throughout the war due to Japan's inability to develop and mass-produce improved designs. Japanese aircraft factories lacked the machine tools, raw materials, and skilled workers necessary for large-scale production. By 1944, Japanese monthly aircraft production had actually declined from earlier war levels due to material shortages and bombing of industrial facilities. The moral angle reveals how the numerical disparity affected the psychology of both sides. Japanese pilots, trained to believe in spiritual strength and individual excellence, found their confidence shattered by encounters with overwhelming American formations. Many experienced a crisis of faith in their leadership and strategy, surviving Japanese accounts days. A sense of hopelessness that pervaded carrier squadrons by early 1944, as pilots realized they were fighting not just superior numbers, but an enemy whose industrial capacity seemed limitless. American aviators experienced the opposite psychological effect. The The knowledge that they flew the most advanced aircraft in the world, supported by the largest naval formation in history, created a sense of invincibility that translated into aggressive tactics and high morale. American pilots knew that behind them stood the productive might of a fully mobilized industrial nation, capable of replacing any losses and supporting any operation their commanders conceived. June 19, 1944, dawns clear over the Philippine Sea as Admiral Saburo Ozawa's mobile fleet approaches what he believes will be Japan's greatest naval victory since Midway. Ozawa commands 9 carriers with 473 aircraft, the largest Japanese carrier force assembled since Pearl Harbor. His plan appears sound: launch massive strikes against the American invasion fleet at Saipan, while American carriers are tied down supporting the amphibious operation. Land-based aircraft from Guam and other islands will coordinate with carrier strikes to overwhelm American defenses. But 60 miles to the east, Vice Admiral Mark Mitscher's Task Force 58 prepares to demonstrate the true meaning of American industrial supremacy. 15 fleet carriers and light carriers steam in perfect formation, their decks crowded with 956 aircraft. The numbers alone tell the story. American fighters outnumber the entire Japanese strike force. When Mitscher's combat air patrols launch at dawn, they put more aircraft into the sky than Japan possesses in its entire remaining carrier force. At 8:30 a.m., radar operators aboard the USS Lexington detect the first Japanese strike wave approaching from the west. The formation appears massive on American radar screens: 69 aircraft including Zeros, dive bombers, and torpedo planes. To Japanese pilots, this represents a significant portion of their remaining naval aviation strength. To American controllers, it seems almost pitifully small compared to the defensive formations they can deploy. Lieutenant Commander Charles Brewer leads the first American intercept, taking 44 F6F Hellcats toward the incoming Japanese formation. As his fighters climb to meet the enemy, Brewer realizes he is witnessing the end of an era. The Japanese pilots he engages fly with the same courage and skill that characterized their predecessors at Pearl Harbor and Coral Sea, but they are hopelessly outnumbered and flying inferior aircraft. Within 30 minutes, 25 Japanese aircraft have been shot down for the loss of just 1 American fighter. The second Japanese strike wave launches at 9:00 a.m. with 107 aircraft, the largest single formation Japan has been able to assemble since 1942. Again, American radar detects the approaching threat with ample time to position defensive fighters. This time, Commander David McCampbell leads the interception with 68 Hellcats. The ensuing battle becomes a massacre. Japanese pilots, many key, with fewer than 100 flight hours, find themselves facing experienced American aviators flying superior aircraft with overwhelming numerical support. Warrant Officer Kiyoshi Furuta, flying a Zero in the second wave, later described the horror of seeing his formation disintegrate around him. American fighters attacked from multiple directions simultaneously, using tactics that the Japanese had never encountered. Where Japanese doctrine emphasized individual dogfighting skills, American pilots flew in coordinated formations that multiplied their effectiveness. Furuta watched helplessly as his squadron mates fell one by one, their aircraft unable to escape the coordinated American attacks. The third Japanese strike, launched at 10:00 a.m. with 47 aircraft, meets an even more devastating reception. By now, American fighter directors have positioned more than 200 F6F Hellcats between the Japanese formations and their targets. The mathematical impossibility of the situation becomes clear to surviving Japanese pilots. They face more than 4 American fighters for every Japanese aircraft in their entire strike force. The psychological impact proves as devastating as the physical destruction. Lieutenant Zenji Abe, leading his formation of 18 Zeros as top cover for the dive bombers, experiences the moment of revelation that will haunt him for the rest of his life. As American fighters swarm around his formation like angry hornets, he realizes that everything he has believed about this war has been a lie. The Americans do not just possess more carriers than Japan. Each American carrier operates more aircraft than entire Japanese air groups. The industrial disparity is not merely significant, it is absolute. By noon on June 19th, the scope of Japanese losses becomes clear to both sides. Of the 373 aircraft launched by Japanese carriers during the morning strikes, fewer than 130 returned to their ships. Many of those that do return are so badly damaged that they cannot fly again. American losses total 29 aircraft, with many pilots rescued by efficient search and rescue operations that the Japanese cannot match. The psychological impact on surviving Japanese pilots proves even more devastating than the material losses. Petty Officer Hajime Toyoshima, one of the few experienced pilots to survive the morning's slaughter, reports to his ship's intelligence officer that American fighter formations seemed endless. Each time Japanese aircraft shot down American fighters, more appeared to take their place. Toyoshima realizes that Japan is not fighting the United States Navy, it is fighting American industrial capacity made manifest in steel and aluminum. Admiral Ozawa, receiving damage reports from his strike squadrons, begins to comprehend the magnitude of his defeat. His carriers have lost more than 60% of their aircraft in a single morning, with minimal damage inflicted on American forces. More importantly, he has lost the majority of his remaining experienced pilots, men who cannot be replaced. The few novice pilots who survive return, traumatized and demoralized, their confidence in Japanese superiority shattered completely. The afternoon brings no respite for Japanese forces. At 2:00 p.m., Admiral Mitcher launches a counterstrike involving 216 aircraft from 8 carriers. This single American formation carries more striking power than the entire Japanese mobile fleet possessed at the start of the day. Japanese combat air patrol consists of fewer than 40 serviceable fighters, many flown by pilots so inexperienced they can barely maintain formation. The American Sea. Reich encounters Japanese defensive formations that would have been formidable in 1942, but appear pathetic in 1944. Lieutenant Commander James Flatley, leading the American fighter escort, later describes the Japanese defenders as brave but hopeless. They attack American formations with suicidal courage, but their inferior numbers and equipment make their sacrifice meaningless. American pilots, flying aircraft with superior armor and firepower, easily survive attacks that would have been lethal 2 years earlier. The carrier Hio becomes the symbol of Japanese helplessness. Hit by 2 torpedoes from American Avenger torpedo bombers, she begins listing heavily to port. Her damage control parties work frantically to save their ship, but they lack the equipment and training that characterizes American damage control efforts. At 8:32 p.m., Hio explodes in a massive fireball visible for 30 miles, taking with her 247 officers and men, along with the remaining aircraft of her air group. As darkness falls on June 19th, Admiral Ozawa tallies his losses with growing horror. His carriers have lost more than 400 aircraft in a single day, reducing Japanese naval aviation to a hollow shell of its former strength. More critically, he has lost the cadre of experienced pilots who represented Japan's last hope for naval aviation effectiveness. The few survivors speak of American formations so large they blocked out the sun, of enemy fighters that seemed to appear from nowhere, of a technological and numerical superiority so complete that resistance seemed futile. The day's events create ripple effects throughout the Japanese military hierarchy. In Tokyo, naval general staff officers receive reports that initially seem impossible to believe. American carriers have not only survived the largest Japanese naval aviation attack since Pearl Harbor, but have simultaneously destroyed Japanese naval aviation as an effective fighting force. The implications extend far beyond a single battle. Japan's strategy for defending its Pacific Empire has collapsed in the space of 12 hours. American pilots returning to their carriers experience the opposite emotional journey. They have participated in what many recognize as the decisive naval aviation battle of the Pacific War. The overwhelming nature of their victory demonstrates not just tactical superiority, but strategic dominance. As they land on flight decks illuminated by electric lights powered by American industrial might, they know they have witnessed the moment when industrial warfare finally proved its decisive power over traditional military virtues. The immediate aftermath of June 19, 1944, reveals the true extent of Japanese naval aviation's collapse. Admiral Ozawa's mobile fleet limps away from the Philippine Sea with fewer than 100 operational aircraft remaining from the 473 that began the day. The mathematical reality is stark. Japan has lost more carrier aircraft in a single day than American shipyards can replace in a single week. The strategic implications extend far beyond numbers. Japan has lost the trained aircrew necessary to operate carrier aircraft effectively. Lieutenant Saburo Sakai, recovering from wounds received during the battle, writes in his diary that June 19th marked the death of Japanese naval aviation. The pilots who survived the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, as American aviators dubbed the one-sided battle, returned to their carriers psychologically broken. Many refused to fly combat missions, claiming mechanical problems with their aircraft or mysterious illnesses. Squadron commanders report that pilot morale has collapsed completely, with many veteran aviators requesting transfer to shore-based units. The quality of replacement pilots arriving at Japanese carriers reveals the depth of Japan's manpower crisis. Ensign Kiyoshi Ogawa, assigned to the carrier Zuikaku in July 1944, has logged fewer than 150 flight hours and has never landed on a carrier deck. His training consisted of basic flight instruction and minimal combat training, nothing approaching the rigorous preparation that characterized pre-war Japanese naval aviation. Ogawa's experience typifies that of hundreds of replacement pilots rushed to carrier squadrons with inadequate preparation. American task force commanders, meanwhile, celebrate what they recognize as a decisive victory. Admiral Mitcher's after-action report notes that Task Force 58 has demonstrated the effectiveness of massed carrier operations supported by superior industrial capacity. His pilots shot down more than 400 Japanese aircraft while losing fewer than 30 of their own, a kill ratio that approaches 20-1. More importantly, American carriers proved they could operate as a unified striking force capable of projecting power across vast distances. The psychological impact on American naval aviation proves equally significant. Pilots who had grown up hearing stories of Japanese aerial supremacy now realize they possess overwhelming technological and numerical advantages. Lieutenant Alex Vraciu, after shooting down 6 Japanese aircraft in a single mission on June 19th, comments that fighting Japanese pilots in 1944 feels like competing against children. The fear and respect that Japanese aviation had inspired in American pilots has evaporated, replaced by confidence bordering on arrogance. Intelligence reports reaching Tokyo paint an increasingly desperate picture of Japan's strategic situation. The mobile fleet's defeat means that Japan no longer possesses the naval aviation strength necessary to challenge major American operations. Admiral Soemu Toyota, Commander-in-Chief of the Combined Fleet, realizes that Japan must now rely entirely on land-based aviation and kamikaze tactics to defend the home islands. Conventional naval aviation, the force that had achieved such spectacular victories in 1941 to 1942, no longer exists as an effective weapon. The industrial implications of the Philippine Sea battle extend beyond immediate military consequences. American aircraft factories receive orders for increased production to replace the relatively modest losses sustained during the battle. Japanese factories, already operating at maximum capacity with inadequate raw materials, cannot hope to replace the massive losses their naval air force has sustained. The gap between American and Japanese aircraft production, already enormous, widens further as American industry reaches peak efficiency. Captured Japanese documents reveal the extent to which the battle has shattered Japanese strategic planning. Staff officers at Naval General Headquarters admit privately that Japan lacks the industrial capacity to rebuild its carrier air groups. The experienced pilots lost on June 19th cannot be replaced within the remaining time frame of the war. Japan's defensive strategy must now rely on shore-based aircraft and increasingly desperate tactics to delay inevitable defeat. The weeks following the Philippine Sea battle witnessed the complete transformation of the Pacific War's strategic balance. Admiral Halsey's Third Fleet, incorporating many of the same carriers that devastated Japanese aviation, launches strikes against Japanese positions throughout the Central Pacific. These operations demonstrate American naval aviation's new dominance. Massive formations of 300 or more aircraft attack Japanese bases with impunity, facing minimal opposition from the few remaining Japanese fighters. Japanese naval aviation attempts to rebuild during the summer of 1944 prove futile. The carrier Shokaku, damaged during the Philippine Sea battle, returns to Japanese ports for repairs carrying fewer than 20 operational aircraft. Her air group, once among the elite units of the Imperial Navy, consists primarily of student pilots with minimal training. Commander Takahashi Sueo, the ship's air group leader, reports to Admiral Toyota that his pilots require at least 6 months of additional training before they can be considered combat ready. The Battle of Leyte Gulf in October 1944 provides the final demonstration of American industrial superiority over Japanese naval tradition. Admiral Ozawa's Northern Force, built around the carriers Zuikaku, Chitose, Chiyoda, and Zuiho, carries only 108 aircraft among 4 carriers. This force serves as a decoy, attempting to lure American carriers away from the main battle. The fact that Japanese carriers operate with skeletal air groups illustrates how completely American industrial might has neutered Japanese naval aviation. American forces approaching Leyte Gulf field more than 1,000 carrier aircraft across 16 fleet and light carriers. When Admiral William Halsey's forces engage Ozawa's decoy fleet on October 25th, the battle resembles target practice more than combat. American pilots, flying the latest F6F Hellcats and F4U Corsairs, encounter Japanese formations so small and inexperienced that many American squadron commanders order their pilots to conserve ammunition for more challenging targets. The psychological impact on remaining Japanese naval aviators proves devastating. Lieutenant Commander Kaneyoshi Muto, one of the few experienced pilots still flying from Japanese carriers, describes the October battles as the final humiliation of Japanese naval aviation. American formations appear overhead like clouds of dust, their numbers so vast that Japanese pilots cannot count them. Muto realizes that Japan is no longer fighting a war. It is being systematically destroyed by an industrial machine beyond its comprehension. Statistical analysis of the Leyte Gulf battles reveals the complete collapse of Japanese carrier aviation. The 4 Japanese carriers lose 95 of their 108 aircraft during the battle, with most pilots killed or missing. American losses total fewer than 50 aircraft from a force of more than 1,000, a loss rate so low that American squadrons can replace their casualties within days. The mathematical impossibility of Japanese recovery becomes clear to even the most optimistic planners in Tokyo. The final months of 1944 witnessed Japanese naval aviation's transformation from conventional warfare to kamikaze tactics. Admiral Takajiro Onishi's decision to organize suicide attacks represents an admission that Japan can no longer compete with American industrial capacity through conventional means. The few remaining experienced pilots receive orders to train inexperienced volunteers for one-way missions against American shipping. The elite naval aviation force that had dominated Pacific skies for 3 years reduces itself to flying human bombs. American naval aviation, meanwhile, reaches unprecedented levels of effectiveness. Task Force 38, the renamed successor to Task Force 58, operates with 17 carriers embarking more than 1,200 aircraft by December 1944. These formations routinely launch strikes involving 400 or more aircraft against Japanese positions, encountering so little resistance that many missions proceed without fighter escort. American pilots describe attacking Japanese airfields where no defending fighters rise to meet them, a situation unimaginable during the early war years. The industrial statistics from late 1944 tell the complete story of American victory. American shipyards commissioned 3 new Essex-class carriers during the final months of the year, each carrying approximately 90 aircraft. Japanese shipyards complete no new carriers and lack sufficient aircraft to equip those remaining in service. American aircraft factories produce more than 8,000 military aircraft per month, while Japanese production falls below 1,500 aircraft monthly due to material shortages and strategic bombing. The shock experienced by Lieutenant Commander Zenji Abe on that June morning in 1944 represents more than personal revelation. It marks the moment when traditional military virtues encountered the full force of industrial warfare. The courage, skill, and dedication that had made Japanese naval aviation supreme in 1941 to 1942 proved insufficient against an enemy that could replace losses faster than Japan could inflict them. American industrial capacity had transformed warfare itself, making numerical superiority not just advantageous, but decisive. The transformation extends beyond military history into the broader story of how industrial societies wage war. Japan's naval aviation represented the pinnacle of pre-industrial military thinking. Individually crafted aircraft flown by extensively trained pilots who viewed combat as a test of personal and national character. American naval aviation embodied industrial warfare, mass-produced aircraft flown by adequately trained pilots who succeeded through superior numbers, equipment, and logistics rather than individual excellence. This shift from artisanal to industrial warfare created psychological trauma that extended far beyond individual battles. Japanese pilots who had grown up believing in the superiority of spirit over materiel found themselves confronting mathematical realities that no amount of courage could overcome. The sight of American carrier formations stretching beyond the horizon represented not just military defeat, but the collapse of an entire worldview based on spiritual strength and individual excellence. The lessons of this transformation extend into the post-war world and beyond. The Philippine Sea battle demonstrated that modern warfare favors societies capable of mobilizing their entire industrial capacity rather than those that rely on military tradition and individual excellence. The American victory resulted not from superior strategy or tactics, but from superior production. More ships, more aircraft, more pilots, and more of everything necessary to sustain prolonged combat operations. For the pilots who witnessed this transformation, both American and Japanese, the experience created memories that shaped their understanding of war and peace for the rest of their lives. American aviators learned that industrial supremacy, properly applied, could achieve victories that traditional military thinking deemed impossible. Japanese pilots learned that courage and skill, however great, could not bridge the gap between industrial societies and those that remained tied to pre-industrial concepts of warfare. The ghost carriers that Lieutenant Commander Abe imagined seeing on the horizon that June morning were not illusions, but prophecies of a future where industrial capacity would determine the fate of nations and where the mathematics of production would prove more decisive than the courage of warriors.